A History of Moxham by Bessie Glenn Porter. This book is lovingly dedicated to my mother and father, Mary Alice and George B. Glenn. The first white people to settle in this part of Cambria County were the Adams family, brothers Solomon and Samuel, and their families. They came from Burke around 1770 and settled on land along a creek later known as Horner Farm. They named the creek Solomon Run. Another creek on that part of the land, later known as Moxham, was named Sam's Run. The Adams families tilled the land and had a dairy and operated a grist mill. In 1774, the Shawnee and Delaware Indians, who were natives of Pennsylvania, became troublesome. They were dissatisfied with the treaty that had been made by them with the white settlers, and they started to harass these settlers. When these settlers heard that the Indians were finally on the warpath, they decided to leave and to go to Fort Bedford for safety. But on the road to Fort Bedford, the Indians attacked them, and Samuel and an Indian engaged in hand to hand battle and were killed. They were both buried along what is now known as Elton Road in front of Cole's farm. Further on the road, the Indians again attacked, and Rachel, Solomon's wife, was scalped. The place has since been known as Rebecca's Hill and the surrounding district as Scalp Level. Solomon and the rest of the family reached Fort Bedford, and apparently they remained there. Later on, Solomon took an active part in the early politics of Bedford. However, some of the Adamses returned here. Samuel had a son named Archibald, who was born in 1764 and died in the Roxbury section of Johnstown in 1859. Samuel's widow afterwards married a man from Berks County named Jesse Proctor. In 1870, a family named Matthew had a large farm of more than 1,000 acres in Cambria County and Stony Creek Township. They cultivated the fields and also had a dairy. The father's name was Samuel and his wife's name was Jane. The father and mother died on the farm and were buried on the hillside overlooking Ferndale, and their headstones are marked 1802. There are also two small stones from which the letters have worn off. There evidently was a large family. In 1849, the farm was sold by Carl, aka Charles von Lunen, a native of Lunen, Germany. The von Lunen family had first settled in Berks County upon arriving in the United States and then coming to Cambria County in 1849. Mr. Charles von Lunen's wife was Henrietta von Lunen. They had a son, Charles, and also a son, Louis, who was born in 1840. Both sons were born in Germany. The Charles von Lunen family lived on a farm and tilled the land and had a dairy also. They also planted a large orchard. Some of the apple trees are still standing to this day. When Charles von Lunen was to be married to Catherine Berkebau, his father sold him part of the farm along the Red Ridge Road in what is now Hogback, and which is still standing in Upper Moxham along the Hogback Road. The bricks used to build the house were made of at the farm. Charles von Lunen and his wife Catherine also had a number of children. The oldest daughter married George Hager. Clara married Alonzo Rogers. Anna married Charles Hager. Minnie married Dwight Roberts. And Henrietta married Dr. Woodruff. The Hager, Roberts, and Rogers families all later built lovely homes and lived on the land near one another, and there are great grandchildren living on part of the same land today. In 1895, Mr. Charles von Lunen and his wife Henrietta decided to build a house in Johnstown City. It was a beautiful, large brownstone house situated on the corner of Bedford Street and Vine Street. They lived in this house until they died. The house was since been torn down. In 1870, when Louis von Lunen was going to marry Emily Griffiths, his father sold him a large acreage on the northern part of the farm, which took in Solomon's Run and Sam's Run and extended the Stony Creek River. On the west, Louis von Lunen built a large farm home in the center of the farm, and he farmed all the fields and developed an orchard. Mr. and Mrs. Louis von Lunen had 9 or 10 children. Several children died in infancy. Daughter Ida married Joseph Leventry. Julia married Charles Leventry. Mary married Winston Davis. Ella never married. George married Jessie Leventry, and Lois Jr. married Zella Leventry. Or wait, Louis Jr. married Zella Lavely. Sorry about that. Um, After 1850, there were a number of families living in Stony Creek Township and surrounding farms. The Hirschbergers, Ulleries, Constables, Bickroys, Schrocks, and other families. Many of the descendants continue to live in this area and are active in the life of the community. Some years ago, the von Lunen heirs donated a large tract of land to Stony Creek Township for a park. Moxham's growth and development was aided by industry and mining. In the early 1880s, two men, Mr. Tom Johnson and Mr. A.J. Moxham, developed a new type of rail for a streetcar. They bought a location on Jackson Street in Johnstown to make the rails. Their venture proved so successful that soon needed more space and bought land in Woodville to build a foundry. But in 1887, they again needed more room and they decided to buy a much larger tract to build a mill. In 1887, Mr. Louis von Lunen agreed to sell Mr. Tom Johnson part of his farm. On December 17th, 1887, Mr. Tom Johnson paid Mr. Louis von Lunen $40 for 95 acres, and the same day, Mr. A. L. Johnson, a brother Johnson, paid Mr. Lunen $25,250 for 94 acres. Mr. von Lunen retained a large acreage to build himself a home and also homes for a number of his family on Grove Avenue and Park Avenue. On Grove Avenue and Griffith Street, Mr. von Lunen also built a number of smaller homes which he rented. Mr. Johnson's associates in the projects were Mr. A.J. Moxham and the DuPont family of Delaware. When Mr. Johnson went to Delaware to confer with the DuPonts, Mr. Johnson drew up a plan to lay out lots of streets for a town around the plant and named the town Moxham. Of course, Mr. Moxham was much surprised when he returned and was very pleased by the honor. When the deeds were made for the lots, with the exception of several lots on Bridge Street, a clause was inserted in them that not any liquor could be sold on the premises. The regulations are still in existence in Moxham to this day. In laying out the streets, the Johnsons retained for the Johnson Railway Company all of the land west of Valley Pike, which ran from Stony Creek River on the north to the Stony Creek River on the south. The Valley Pike was Central Avenue. The other streets were named Coleman Avenue, Park Avenue, Grove Avenue, Cypress Avenue, Highland Avenue, Linden Avenue, Russell Avenue, and Forest Avenue. The streets from east to west were named Griffith Street, Lunan Street, Ohio Street, Village Street, and Bond Street. After some time, Jacob Street, Charles Street, and Frederick Street were opened. And at each end of Central Avenue, the main business area, there were toll houses which people going to Conemaugh Old Town, later known as Johnstown, had to stop and pay a toll. About this time, the men who worked in management in the Johnstown City Railway Company and lived in Woodville, Prospect, and downtown Johnstown decided to buy lots and build homes in Moxham to be nearer their work. The houses they built on Park Avenue were houses of 10 or more rooms and were built in the middle of two lots. Mr. E.B. Entwistle built on the corner of Park Avenue and Lunan Street. His family moved into the home in February 1889. Just 3 months before the Johnstown flood of 1889, Mr. Entwistle said that they owed their lives to the Johnson Company. Others who built homes on Park Avenue in 1889 were the Coffin family, the McLeans, and the Masterson family. During the year, homes were built all along Park Avenue and up as far as Bond Street. Mr. Cyrus Elder and Mr. James Swank and several other families built their homes on Coleman Avenue.